Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. We have back on the line coffee expert, a fan favorite, Ildi Revi from Purity Coffee is on the line. How you doing today, Ildi?
Hello, Jordan and listeners.
Yeah, how's life? I know you've been killing it really in the world of coffee education. You're doing your courses and your seminars. How is life? How is everything going in the coffee education sphere?
It's great. I was just in Brazil working with I worked with an exporter and we did a lot of cupping with that team.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, and then we went to the University of Rio, which is where Purity's science, we do a lot of experiments with their lab there. So we were calibrating the students there to some cupping and tasting.
That's so cool.
And then I'm off to Sweden next month to do some cupping calibration too.
So exciting. That's super exciting. Well, we appreciate you taking time to get on the phone and rap with us a little bit about coffee. I wanted to cover today's topic with you specifically because you kind of live in this world. And there's a lot of, I don't want to say misconception, but there's a lot of information out there, and I really want to go over it with you, and that is the world of roasting coffee. It seems that the roast is just so incredibly important, especially in your world, when you're not only aiming for a delicious coffee, but a healthy coffee. I'm sure it just adds a whole nother layer. So why don't we start with just the general principles of roasting coffee, what people are after when they roast coffee, and maybe how that has changed over the years.
Yes, this is a really, as you can imagine, complicated topic. And it's very hard to study also because we have coffee from origins all over the world that are grown at different altitudes, receiving different rainfall, different cultivars, varieties.
Different agricultural methods, I'm sure. That probably produces totally different chemicals. Wow.
Different rainfall, different sunlight. Even the same farm may have different tasting coffee. They may have doleritic soils on one side of a mountain that is facing south where they grow coffee versus the other side of the mountain may have some other type of soil and it gets a different amount of sunlight. So even if it's the same cultivar of coffee, you're going to have different chemistry within the bean. And so it's really hard to study the chemistry of coffee and chemistry of roasting because anytime you do research, it's just a snapshot in time that a scientist may have done of just that particular coffee on that particular day at that particular roast. And to extrapolate, so we see a lot of research out of Brazil because that's the biggest producer in the world of Arabica coffee. And so they have a lot of data from their roasting, but you try and apply that to Ethiopian coffees or Sumatran coffees that are processed differently. Some are washed. A lot of Brazils are natural, which we've talked about that in other podcasts, meaning that they're dried with the skin on the bean or the seed. Whereas Ethiopian, the skin is removed, right. But there's still parchment. Whereas in Sumatra, everything is removed: the skin, the parchment, and even some of the silver skin is removed in the process. So you're going to get different roasts, different moisture content, and roasting starts with the green bean quality and the green bean moisture content, and then it proceeds. The first stage, you have a roaster, and there's certain temperatures that are fairly universal with roasting, whether it's, we're talking centigrade or Fahrenheit, doesn't matter. But the stages of development in roasting, we basically have to get the seed or the bean. It's the same. We call it a coffee bean, but it's really a seed. From green, and it's a pale green. It's sort of like a, have you ever seen
it's like a white green. It's a really beautiful color.
It is. It's a really pretty color. From that green to brown.
We're going from green to brown. That's the goal.
To go from green to brown. And And then how brown you want to make it at the end,
Right.
it is involved. So it's just like any cooking. It's applying heat to break the chemical bonds and transform the original agricultural product into a different product.
Okay, so
So
let me ask you this
yeah,
then. So what you just described was interesting because there probably is no perfect roast. If every coffee is a little bit different and some leave the skin on and some don't, like there's probably no one perfect roast for every blend. Is that a fair statement?
it's very fair, and it's very common. So twice now I've done this sort of fun experiment with groups of roasters. I helped to organize the Southeast Roasters Consortium in the U.S., and it's a group of about 40 to 60 coffee roasters, and we have a gathering once a year. And about 10 years ago, we took the exact same bag of Brazilian coffee, exact same, sent 5 pounds to 20 of the roasters and said, just roast this coffee, bring it. We're going to taste it, see what you did with it.
Mm-hmm.
So every roasting person has a different type of machine. The machines are different. The machines may have different types of heat. Some were electric, some were propane, some were natural gas, the type of heat, how it's applied. And we brought in these 20 coffees. We cupped them all, even though it was all from the exact same sack of coffee. It was as if there were 20 different coffees on the table.
I believe it.
So it took 20 completely different flavor profiles from the same bag of coffee.
Wow.
And then we did that same thing just last year, but we used espresso instead of brewed coffee. We did espresso.
Nice. Same results.
And then
it's just wildly different every time. And you're not even usually starting with the same batch. So it's like got to be so many different factors making it so super complex.
Which is why I also find it funny when roasters are really secretive about their process. It's like, I could give you my roast profiles, but if you have a different machine, the coffee is going to taste different. It just is.
Interesting.
And it's very hard even to stick with the same profile. I mean, we struggle because as a company that pumps out a lot of coffee, we have to, farms all over the world and the farms that we buy from only can produce a certain amount of coffee. So once that coffee is gone, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have to find it from somewhere else, which, as we all know, is going to taste different. So even from the same farm, we work with one cooperative, and they can produce about 6 containers of coffee a year. A container is about 35,000 to 40,000 pounds of coffee.
That's fascinating.
But each container, it's a co-op. So it's a group of farmers. So each one is producing coffee. So each container, even though it's the same region, like within Nicaragua, that each container is going to have a little bit different moisture content, a little bit different whatever. So to produce a consistent roast, we may have the profile exact and doing the profile exactly the same. But here the coffee, we just got a fresh container of Nicaragua, and it's a little bit higher moisture content than the last one was.
Needs
and now
something
we're
different.
getting, and it's November. So the temperature and the air pressure is different in the roastery than it was in August in North Carolina. All of these things impact the roasting. So it's really hard to find a specialty coffee and get it super consistent, which is why the specialty world is so set on highlighting different coffees at different times of year. And because really you can't get it the same again.
And I'd imagine your job is even tenfold harder because you're not just trying to roast this coffee into oblivion or whatever. You're also trying to achieve certain health levels. So maybe talk to me about that. Like you're not just monitoring to make the taste the same. You're trying to make a healthy coffee.
Well, this is you're bringing up a really important point because it's kind of, taste is so subjective.
Yes.
So it's really hard to make a coffee that everybody likes the taste of a certain coffee.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not going to happen. What we can do, so it's almost like you have to pick pick a
Pick an avenue.
rationale for
Yeah, totally.
roasting,
Totally.
and our rationale is health. We will find the coffees, and we are going to roast them, send them to the lab. That container of coffee, the new one arrived, let's say, and just make sure that the health parameters, the standards range that we've set, and we have standards for what acrylamide, chlorogenic
Right.
acids, um, trigonylene, melanoidins are set for each coffee. It has to be a range because from batch to batch, it fluctuates.
Right.
And so, but health has to be the reason. And so that's why sometimes our coffee will taste different.
Because we're
And people
achieving
will
those.
say,
Yeah.
hey, the coffee's tasting different. What did you do? And it's like, well, the health stuff is the same, but the taste may be different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really, this is the most difficult thing we face at Purity, is changing the thinking from taste to the product health benefits. But at the same time, nobody wants to, coffee is not medicine. It's something that is pleasurable. It's something we want people to drink 2 to 4 cups a day for the best
It's still
health.
got to be delicious.
So
and it
it's
is,
got to
though.
be delicious.
That's what's magical about nature, is that magically that medium blend seems to be really a big hit with people who try it for the first time, no matter where they are in the purity cycle.
Well, yeah. So the medium blend. So when we're roasting, we send things to the lab, but the lab is expensive. Every time we do a chlorogenic acid test and whatever, we're facing $1,000 bill every time we send and ask them to check.
It's cool that you guys commit to that, man.
Well, yeah, but we can't
commit to it too much.
Yeah, so we have to do it for a certain batch and then set the profile and then stick with the profile, and that's how we can do it. It's not the cost for the company, but because the company would pass on the cost to the customer, right? And so if people wanted us to do it every batch to guarantee something, you would be paying, $400 for a bag of coffee.
Right.
Which I'm exaggerating.
We've done some episodes on expensive coffee, and you're not even nearing the top of the chain. So I see what you're saying. It depends on how far you want to go with it, is what you're saying. How deep? Right. How deep do you want to get?
Well, and micro changes are happening. So once we have the CGA, the chlorogenic acid levels that we want to achieve, we have seen, we have a computer program called Cropster that we can see exactly what I know. Right?
They name them just like all the other apps. Cropster, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's great, actually. It's an amazing app. That it keeps track of, it graphs the roast as you're doing it.
Whoa.
So and once you set a profile, you just follow the profile, and
wow, that's
theoretically
cool.
We get the same results.
So it traces the roast curve line with time and temperature on an axis, essentially.
Exactly.
That's
and
so cool.
What temperature you put the coffee in, what temperature you finish the coffee.
Interesting.
So getting into the details of roasting, then, these little seeds are packed with hundreds of chemical compounds.
Right.
Everything from oils to carbohydrates to organic acids and so on, cellulose and water. So we put the beans in. The first part of the roast, we're just evaporating the water. But the seed has outside skin coating on it that is sort of contains it, so it's like a little pressure cooker. So as you're roasting, the water is boiling inside these teeny little beans, and we know that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius or 212 Fahrenheit. The beans are building up pressure, and then they pop open when the pressure gets too much.
Right.
And that's what we call first crack. And that can happen anywhere from, in really moist beans, about 380. These, again, it depends on the roaster and everything, but let's just roughly say 380 degrees Fahrenheit to 430 412, 410, whatever. Somewhere in that range is this what we call first crack. And
Okay.
then the chemical reactions continue. The beans are drying out, the cellulose of the cell structures are drying out, and then they crack a second time if you get them up to the temperature where they will crack a second time. Now, a lot of roasters pull the coffee out of the roaster before they get to second crack. But
Interesting.
the coffees that you see that are dark roasted do get into second crack. And that's why you see dark roasted coffees are oily,
Right.
because it went from the second crack, the cellulose of the bean structure is broken. And so all those lipids and oils that are inside the beans are able to sort of emerge to the surface of the bean. So when people see a lighter roasted coffee and there's no oils, sometimes people say there's something wrong with the coffee. It looks dry. Um,
It's
your
just all
coffee
those
is
oils
dry.
are still inside.
Exactly. It's actually moisture. And the thing about having oils in dark roast on the outside of the bean is that those, as they're exposed to oxygen, they're going to degrade faster.
Right.
They're going to, right?
Eventually go rancid, right? Like that doesn't sound like.
Exactly.
Okay, so I see a lot of over roasted coffee in my opinion. Like I see what you just described a lot. Like, some of these like it's got a skull and crossbones on the bag and it's like specialty roast and you open it up it's like black. What is the deal? What happens to the health properties if you cook the crap out of your beans like that?
Well, it's just like anything that you cook too much, you're burning
Good
off
point.
everything. So what we say in roasting is once you get to second crack, now you're starting to taste the roast and not the coffee.
Okay.
So before first crack, there's so many chemical reactions happening in addition to the evaporation of water. We have two browning reactions are happening. The Maillard reaction begins to happen roughly around 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the reaction that takes amino acids and reducing sugars and turns any carbohydrate type substance brown. So you put your bread in the toaster
Right.
and it goes from white to brown. That's the Maillard reaction. Cookies baking in the oven, crackers, potato chips frying, any of these things undergo the Maillard reaction. It's a natural browning reaction, amino acids and reducing sugars. Reducing sugars meaning not sucrose.
Mm.
Sucrose is more complex. These other sugars are simpler, like fructose and glucose, things like that.
Interesting. I didn't know there was a
So,
name for that.
yeah. So as the Maillard reaction happens, the browning is important for health because this is where we're getting our melanoidins produced. And melanoidins, it turns out, has health benefits. We're
Oh,
just
wow.
looking, I've just been studying melanoidins we're working on a dark roast. And we've avoided doing a dark roast for a long time because we're so focused on the antioxidant compounds like
Right.
chlorogenic acids
Which
and
suffer from
trigonally.
those. Yeah, which suffer from those later roasts.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
As it heats destroying those. So a dark roast, it's just going to have fewer chlorogenic acids or less chlorogenic acid in it. And so what can we say then about the health? So we've started to look at melanoidins and there's not a lot of literature, but some of the literature I've found has become quite interesting in terms of compounds that impact parts of the brain.
Ooh. Is this
Parts
more
of the
this
brain,
is this more the neuroprotectant qualities that we've been talking about?
yes,
Oh,
exactly.
protecting from
And
dementia and Alzheimer's and stuff?
dementia, Alzheimer's, but there's a part of the
Wow.
brain that acts on addiction. And
Oh.
the darker roasts have more of these melanoidins that can calm that
Wow, that would be
addiction
great.
center,
Help you kick the
right?
cigarettes, just have another bit of coffee?
Well, not only coffee, but choose a dark roast.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. So some of these things are very interesting. The other thing is not all chlorogenic acids. There are several chlorogenic acids. There are more than I know that I know about at least 12,
Mm.
but some of them burn off later than others.
Okay,
And
so you
these
can
are called
maintain some.
lactones. Exactly. So the 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 ratio percentage of lactones in dark roasted coffee is higher than in lighter roasted coffee. I
Oh
mean,
man, that
there's
is interesting.
yeah, and so lactones also have some of they still have antioxidant properties.
Right.
And then the
That is
other
so
thing
fascinating.
about dark roast is in terms of just the acidity, the titratable acidity of coffee is lower in
In a dark
dark roasted
roast.
coffee. Yes.
Right. Okay. So the acid reduces. What about the other direction when a roast is what you would consider to be too light? What occurs in that situation?
Well, that's what I call battery acid coffee. I don't really want to drink that. All coffees have organic acids, numerous organic acids, just like any food products have organic, even though citrus fruits, we call them citrus and we think they're just citric acid. They have malic acid in them. So coffee
Mm,
has various acids in it. And throughout the roasting process, there are a lot of changes that happen in acidity. Some acids increase during roasting. And remember, we're breaking bonds of chemicals apart in these
mm,
little beans. So all these compounds, it's just thermodynamics of cooking, we're as the heat is applied, the bonds are breaking of some of the chemicals, the carbohydrates, the sugars, these acids. I mean, when we talk about acids degrading, they're breaking apart, but they're not gone. They're just reconfiguring themselves as something
whoa.
else,
That's so cool.
right? And well, so that's what cooking is. So some acids increase during roasting. Acetic acid, which we know is vinegar, increases all the way up to 240 or 460 degrees, which is like super dark roast. Like,
Mm.
so, I mean, 460, if you take your coffee out at 460, you're taking out a dark coffee.
Okay.
So basically, so that means the entire time you're roasting, acetic acid is increasing. And we do know that acetic acid has some health benefits, right? Formic acid is increasing, glycolic acid, lactic acid, all of those acids are in the coffee and those are increasing during the
Mm,
roast. Meanwhile, acids like malic acid and citric acid are just breaking down. So the malic acid around 375 degrees starts to decline significantly.
mm.
Like a Kenyan coffee may have uh, I don't know, maybe like 75 milligrams
Malic
of
acid.
uh, of malic acid per 100 grams or whatever of beans. And so it may start out at 75, but by the time it hits first crack, it may have lost 20 milligrams
Oh, interesting.
of malic acid.
So
So by
some
the
over
time you take it
25%.
out at 425 degrees, now you're down to 50 milligrams
That is interesting.
of malic acid. Yeah, so you lose 25 milligrams of malic acid possibly and that's just so malic acid's decreasing, citric acid is decreasing. Citric acid plummets around 350 degrees. So when you're talking about these lighter roasts, as there and citric acid, there's a like Central American coffees have a lot of citric acid.
I love that you're
And
into the specific regions. That is so fascinating. And let's please do an episode shortly on the different regions and their proclivities.
yeah,
I think
well,
that's so
so
fascinating.
it is, and it's partly to do with the soils, and it's partly to do with the cultivars of coffee, as well
So
as
cool.
the processing methods that are used.
Listen, honestly,
But
we're already coming up here to like 30 minutes. We should probably do two parts on this roasting. I feel like you're just now getting warmed up. Do you agree? Do you like that pun
sure.
I just threw in there? Let's give a little overview here and we'll wrap this episode and then we'll do a part two on roasting. But maybe just a little recap on what we're trying to achieve with Purity's roast and what we're not trying to do.
Right. So what we're trying to do is people complain about acid reflux with coffee, and the titratable acidity of coffee is roughly around 5 pH. stomach acid is way more acidic than that. So to be putting something less acidic in your stomach and then blaming that on the acidity, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. Something else may be going on with it, and there may be
That's what
some
Dr.
other
Coffee's been saying.
compounds.
That's what Dr. Coffee's been saying, is that he thinks the coffee belly isn't
Right.
so much the acidity. So that's interesting that you say that.
Well, yeah, that's also what research is showing, but there are so many other compounds in coffee, and it's not to say people are imagining it. It's
Exactly.
just, we shouldn't blame the acidity
Right.
of the coffee. But at the same time, people, I mean, I don't like to drink too acidic a coffee. I've seen coffees that are very acidic, and you put, espressos that are acidic, which I just find I can't drink them.
Right.
But they'll add milk to it, and the milk will curdle. It's
Jeez.
crazy, right? Anyway, with purity, what we're trying to achieve is just balance, a balance of everything while maintaining the chlorogenic acids as much as possible with our medium roast. And now with our dark roast, we're trying to, we're just in the final stages of developing the standard, the health standard that we want to meet.
That's so cool.
With it. And yeah.
Exploring,
so that's where,
exploring that dark roast health benefit. So
yeah.
I love that. I love
the
that.
one thing though about taste, though, Jordan, that I can't stress enough is we may get the roast exactly right, but then we hand it over to the consumer who's going to grind and brew it. And so many things
another
can
episode here, aren't
I
you?
know.
I love
well,
it.
This is the thing.
You got to do it right.
Is that we get customers who say, why does this taste different? And some of it may have to do with the roast, some of it may have to do with the green coffee, but a lot of things happen in the brewing process too.
Ooh,
and so
stay tuned, listeners. We'll do the perfect way to brew your purity, and we'll talk about all the different variables. And we got to do a part 2 because this is so enlightening. I feel like, Ildi, you're just a great guest because you are educated on the science side, and you can talk to us about these different compounds, but you're not just studying it. You're actually in it. You're flying to these different places. You're tasting the coffee. You're meeting with the farmers. And I think that's really cool. And I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me on air.
Thanks, Jordan. And we'll talk some other time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ildi. Everybody listening, thank you for listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. This is Ildi Revi and Jordan River signing off, saying have an extraordinary day. Bye-bye now.